Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we uncover the power of kindness in everyday moments. Today's story follows Katie, a hardworking waitress whose ordinary day takes an extraordinary turn after a surprising encounter with Jacob Morgan. What he leaves behind, a note and a life-changing tip, teaches us profound lessons about hope and compassion. The afternoon sun streamed through the large front windows of Maple Grove Cafe, casting warm, golden light over the quiet room. The usual hum of conversation had faded to a murmur, and the scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the faint sweetness of pastries that had cooled on the counter. For Katie, the day felt endless. Her shift had stretched on for hours, and each minute dragged as though time itself had slowed. Katie moved through the cafe with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years in the service industry. Her uniform, a simple button-up shirt and black slacks, was neat but showed the wear of countless long shifts. Her ponytail bobbed as she wiped down the last table by the window, her mind already drifting to the pile of bills waiting for her at home. Rent was due in 2 days, and her phone bill had been sitting unpaid for weeks. Every tip mattered, but today had been especially disheartening. Most customers had left a few coins on their receipts, barely enough to cover her bus fare, let alone her mounting expenses. Katie sighed, glancing at the clock above the counter. Just one more hour, she thought, trying to summon the energy to keep going. Her manager, a kind but weary woman named Diane, gave her a sympathetic glance from behind the counter, as if to silently say, "Hang in there." Katie managed a small smile in return before turning back to her task. The soft chime of the cafe's bell snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up just as the door swung open, and a young man stepped inside. He was tall and lean, dressed simply in a plain shirt and slacks. Yet there was an effortless poise about him. Behind him, 2 other men followed, their eyes scanning the room with quiet precision. At first, Katie thought they might be regulars, but the way the 2 men moved, their subtle but sharp focus, suggested something else entirely. Security, perhaps? Katie's curiosity flickered as she watched the young man make his way to a corner table. He moved with a calm confidence, his posture relaxed yet composed. For a moment, Katie hesitated. There was something familiar about him, though she couldn't quite place it. Shaking off her thoughts, she grabbed her order pad and approached the table with a professional smile. "Good afternoon," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Can I get you something to start?" The young man looked up, and their eyes met. His face was striking, clean-cut features and an air of quiet assurance, but it was his expression that caught her off guard. His eyes held a kind of sincerity, a calmness that felt almost out of place in the hurried world of the cafe. And then it clicked. Katie's heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned. This wasn't just any customer. It was Jacob Morgan. Katie had seen his face in countless news articles and TV segments. The youngest son of a former president, Jacob Morgan was known for his reserved nature and aversion to the public spotlight. Yet here he was, sitting quietly in her cafe, far from the bustling world of Washington or New York. "I'll just have a cappuccino," Jacob said, his voice polite and measured. "And maybe one of those croissants." Katie nodded, struggling to keep her expression neutral. "Absolutely. Anything else?" "That'll be perfect." "Thank you," he replied, offering a faint but genuine smile. His words were simple, but there was a warmth in his tone that caught Katie off guard. She quickly scribbled the order and walked back to the counter, her mind racing as she prepared the coffee. Her hands moved almost mechanically, the motions ingrained from years of practice. Yet her thoughts were anything but calm. Why was Jacob Morgan here, of all places? And why did he seem so ordinary? Stealing a glance toward the corner table, Katie noticed Jacob staring out the window, his gaze distant. He wasn't scrolling on a phone or typing away on a laptop like most customers. Instead, he seemed lost in thought, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the glass of water she had brought him earlier. There was a stillness about him, a quietness that felt rare and almost sacred. By the time the cappuccino and croissant were ready, Katie had managed to steady herself, balancing the tray carefully. She approached his table and set the items down with practiced grace. "Here you go," she said, her voice gentle. Jacob looked up and smiled faintly. "Thank you. You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else," Katie replied, keeping her tone polite but neutral. As she turned to walk away, she felt an odd sensation, almost like a weight pressing against her, urging her to stay. Maybe it was the way Jacob's eyes lingered on her, curious but not intrusive. Or maybe it was her own exhaustion, making her hyper-aware of every detail. Whatever it was, her heart fluttered slightly, and she quickly busied herself with cleaning nearby tables. Minutes passed, and the cafe settled into its familiar rhythm. Katie found herself glancing at Jacob more than once, drawn to the quiet way he carried himself. He sat with a certain ease, his posture relaxed but attentive, as if he were present in the moment in a way few people ever were. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Katie noticed Jacob pull a pen from his pocket. He leaned over the receipt, scribbling something quickly before folding the paper neatly and tucking it beneath his empty coffee cup. A pang of curiosity shot through her, but she forced herself to focus on her work. When Jacob stood to leave, he gathered his phone and coat with quiet efficiency. As he passed the counter, Katie called out softly, "Thank you for coming." He turned slightly, offering another faint smile. "Have a good day." The words lingered longer than they should have, and Katie watched him exit, the bell above the door chiming softly in his wake. The cafe felt strangely still in his absence, as though the room itself had noticed his departure. Katie approached the table to clear it, her movements slow and deliberate. She picked up the coffee cup and plate, pausing as her eyes landed on the folded receipt. Carefully, she unfolded the paper, her heart thudding in her chest. What she saw left her breathless. Beneath the total was a tip so generous it made her stomach drop for crisp digits. But it wasn't just the money. Above it, written in neat handwriting, were the words that would stay with her forever. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Katie's hands trembled as she read the note again, her vision blurring with tears. In that moment, the exhaustion of her day melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and disbelief. She sank into the chair across from where Jacob had Saturday, clutching the note as though it were a lifeline. For the first time in weeks, Katie felt truly seen. Katie couldn't stop staring at the note, her trembling hands clutching the folded paper as though it might vanish if she let go. The words etched into it felt heavier than they looked. She read them again and again, her chest tightening with every pass. "Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming." Tears slid down her cheeks, unbidden and unstoppable. It wasn't just the money, though the generous tip was staggering. It was the message. Those simple, heartfelt words had reached into the deepest part of her, where her exhaustion, worry, and self-doubt lived. Jacob Morgan, someone she never imagined would notice her, had seen her struggles and chosen to remind her that she wasn't invisible. As Katie sat there, lost in her emotions, the soft chime of the cafe door startled her back to the present. She quickly wiped her tears with the back of her hand and tucked the note into the pocket of her apron. Diane, her manager, approached with a concerned look. "You okay, Katie?" Diane asked, her brow furrowed as she glanced at the untouched dishes on the table. "What happened?" Katie hesitated, unsure how to explain the overwhelming moment she'd just experienced. I'm fine," she stammered, though her voice cracked slightly. "Just a really generous tip." Diane raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "Generous enough to make you cry?" Katie managed a shaky laugh, pulling the receipt from her pocket and handing it to Diane. "Take a look for yourself." The moment Diane's eyes landed on the number, she let out a low whistle. "No way," she murmured, glancing up at Katie. "Who left this?" "The guy at the corner table," Katie said softly. "That was Jacob Morgan." Diane's eyes widened, the name catching her by surprise. "The Jacob Morgan? You're serious?" Katie nodded, pulling the handwritten note from her pocket with careful hands, as though it might crumble if handled too roughly. "It's not just the money," she said. her voice barely above a whisper. He wrote this. Diane took the note, her expression softening as she read it. For the first time in months, Katie saw genuine kindness in her manager's eyes. Wow, Diane whispered, handing the note back. That's something else. It really is. Katie agreed, folding the note again and tucking it away. I don't even know why he wrote it. I didn't do anything special. Diane looked at her for a long moment, her gaze steady but gentle. Sometimes people just know. Katie, she said, they can see what you're going through, even when you think you're hiding it. You're here every day, working your tail off, always kind to customers, even the ones who don't deserve it. Maybe he saw that. Katie swallowed hard, Diane's words settling in her chest like a warm, steady weight. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. For months, she had been treading water, working double shifts to cover rent, skipping meals to afford her mom's prescriptions. Through it all, she clung to kindness because it was the only part of herself she felt the world hadn't taken away. Somehow, Jacob Morgan had seen that, and he'd reminded her that it still mattered. The rest of Katie's shift passed in a blur. Whispers rippled through the cafe as her co-workers pieced together the story. A couple of baristas huddled near the pastry case, sneaking glances at Katie and murmuring excitedly. You served him, didn't you? One of them asked, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. What did he say? Was he nice? Katie smiled faintly, brushing her hands on her apron. Yeah, he was really nice. I'd freak out, the barista said with a laugh. That's so crazy. Katie didn't say anything more. Somehow, sharing the note and the tip felt too personal, like putting a sacred moment on display. For now, it was hers, and she wanted to keep it that way. When her shift finally ended, Katie pulled off her apron and tucked the notes safely into her bag. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, the weight of the day seemed to lift slightly. Her feet felt lighter as she walked to the subway station, the noise of the city fading into the background. On the train ride home, Katie found herself holding the note again, her eyes tracing the words she had already memorized. Brighter days are coming. She whispered the sentence under her breath, as though saying it aloud might make it true. Jacob didn't have to write that. He didn't have to care. But he did, and that single act of kindness had changed something in her. But Katie's quiet reflection wouldn't last. The next morning, as sunlight peeked through her apartment window, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She groaned, reaching for it with a sleepy hand, but the sight of her locked screen jolted her awake. Dozens of notifications flooded her screen, texts, emails, social media alerts. What is going on? She mumbled, squinting at the messages. One text caught her eye. Katie, is this you? You're famous. Attached was a link to an article. She clicked it, her heart racing as the headline loaded. Jacob Morgan leaves Waitress a touching note and huge tip. Internet reacts. Katie said bolte pride, her pulse pounding in her ears. The article recounted her story in detail. A struggling waitress, an unexpected guest, a note filled with empathy, and a tip that seemed life-changing. A photo of the receipt and the note, blurred but still recognizable, was splashed across the screen. Her hands shook as she scrolled through hundreds of comments. This is what the world needs more of. Jacob Morgan seems like such a kind soul. Small acts of kindness can make a huge difference. Katie's stomach turned. Someone must have seen the note, snapped a picture, and shared it online. Would have been a private, deeply personal moment was now public knowledge, spreading like wildfire across social media. The thought made her feel exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. As her mom's soft cough echoed from the next room, Katie took a deep breath, grounding herself in reality. She didn't ask for this attention, but she couldn't change what had happened. What she did next would define how her story unfolded. And deep down, she knew Jacob's words held the answer. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. Katie awoke the next morning to find the world outside her small apartment changed. The quiet anonymity she had always taken for granted had been replaced by a whirlwind of attention. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages, notifications, and calls. friends she hadn't spoken to in years, distant family members, and even strangers were reaching out. Still in her pajamas, Katie scrolled through the messages, her heart pounding. Screenshots of articles, headlines, and social media posts filled her inbox. The note Jacob had left, along with a massive tip, had gone viral overnight. Her story was now a national sensation. The kindness of Jacob Morgan, paired with the humility and hard work of a struggling waitress, had struck a chord with people everywhere. She stared at her phone in disbelief. "This can't be real," she whispered. But it was. Her story was everywhere, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on her chest. A text from her manager, Diane, brought her back to reality. "Katie, they want to interview you. Call me ASAP." Katie groaned, setting the phone aside and burying her face in her hands. The idea of being on television, of sharing her personal struggles with the world, felt suffocating. She wasn't someone who craved the spotlight. She was just a waitress trying to make ends meet. And now the world seemed to be looking at her like some kind of hero. As she made her way to work, the streets felt different, quieter, yet charged with a strange energy. At the cafe, the usual hum of conversation had been replaced by whispers and stolen glances. Regular customers smiled at her in a way they never had before, and her coworkers greeted her with a mixture of excitement and awe. "You're famous now," one of the baristas exclaimed as Katie tied her apron. "How does it feel?" Katie forced a small smile, unsure how to respond. "It feels overwhelming," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Diane approached her, her expression a mix of pride and concern. "You okay, Katie?" Katie nodded, though her hands fidgeted with the edges of her apron. "I think so. You know, what Jacob did, and how you've handled all this. It's special. Not everyone gets to be part of something like this," Diane said, resting a reassuring hand on Katie's shoulder. Katie swallowed hard, Diane's words echoing in her mind. It didn't feel special. It felt overwhelming, like a tidal wave of attention she hadn't asked for. And yet, deep down, she couldn't deny that Jacob's gesture had touched something profound, not just in her, but in countless others who had read the note and seen the story. By midday, the cafe was busier than Katie had ever seen it. Customers came not just for coffee and pastries, but to catch a glimpse of the waitress whose story had gone viral. Some left notes on napkins, others tipped generously, and a few simply smiled and thanked her for inspiring them. It was surreal, like living in a dream she couldn't wake from. But the attention also came with its challenges. A news crew parked outside the cafe, cameras and microphones in tow. Reporters lingered near the entrance, waiting for a chance to speak with her. Katie ducked behind the counter, her anxiety mounting with every passing moment. "They're not going anywhere," Diane said, gesturing toward the reporters. "You might want to say something, just to get it over with." Katie shook her head. "I don't think I can." That evening, as she walked home, the weight of the day felt heavier than ever. The quiet streets offered little solace, and her phone buzzed constantly with more notifications and messages. One text, in particular, gave her pause. It was from Diane. "Morning show wants to feature you. They'll call me for confirmation. Think about it." Katie stopped in her tracks, her feet planted on the sidewalk. The idea of sitting in front of cameras, sharing her story with millions of viewers, made her stomach churn. But another thought pushed its way to the surface. Jacob's note wasn't just about her. It was about kindness, about resilience, about hope. Maybe, just maybe, sharing her story could remind others of those things. When she reached her apartment, her mom was sitting in the recliner, flipping through the television channels. As Katie placed her bag on the counter, a familiar voice echoed from the TV. A simple note left by Jacob Morgan for a hardworking waitress is melting hearts across the country. Katie froze, her eyes locking on the screen. The headline flashed across the bottom. "A quiet act of generosity sparks national conversation." Her mom turned to look at her, her eyes soft with understanding. "That's you, isn't it?" her mom asked gently. Katie sighed, nodding as she sat down beside her. "Yeah, Mom, that's me." Her mom reached for her hand, squeezing it softly. It's a good thing. You know, people need stories like this. Katie looked down, her emotions swirling. I didn't ask for it, she whispered. Sometimes the good things find you when you're not looking for them. Her mom replied. What he wrote, it was special. And people are talking about it because they need to believe there's still kindness in the world. You're part of that now. Tears welled in Katie's eyes again, but this time she didn't fight them. Her mom was right. The note wasn't just about her. It was about hope. It was about showing people that even in the darkest times, small acts of kindness could carry immense weight. The next morning, Katie made her decision. She called Diane. Tell the morning show I'll do it, she said quietly. Diane's voice brimmed with surprise. Are you sure? Yes, Katie replied, her voice steady. But I'm not going to talk about the money. I want to talk about the note, about kindness. That's all. The interview was simple. Katie sat on the couch, her hands folded nervously in her lap, as the host leaned forward with a warm smile. Katie, your story has touched so many people. Can you tell us how it felt when you first read Jacob's note? Katie paused, choosing her words carefully. Honestly, it caught me off guard. It wasn't about the money. It was what he wrote. I've been going through a tough time, and those words meant more than I can explain. The host nodded, reading the note aloud. Your kindness and hard work don't go unnoticed. My family has been where you are. Stay strong. Brighter days are coming. What do you think he meant by that? The host asked. Katie looked at the camera, her voice steady but full of emotion. I think he meant that we all go through struggles, no matter who we are or where we come from. And sometimes, when you're at your lowest, the smallest act of kindness can remind you that you're not alone. It gives you hope. The studio fell silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air. Then the host smiled. That's a beautiful message. Is there anything you'd like to say to Jacob if he's watching? Katie's voice wavered slightly, but she smiled. Just thank you, not for the money, but for seeing me, for reminding me to hold on to hope. You made more of a difference than you know. When the interview aired, Katie didn't check the comments or headlines. Instead, she went back to work the next day, her steps a little lighter. The cafe was as busy as ever, but now customers left kind notes on napkins, tipped just a little extra, or simply said thank you with sincerity. Katie kept Jacob's note tucked safely in her wallet, where it would stay for years to come, a tangible reminder of the profound truth it held. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness could change a life, and in doing so, it might just change the world. Thank you for watching this heartfelt story on Empathy Stories. Katie's experience reminds us that small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect, touching lives far beyond what we can imagine. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting tales of love and empathy. Together, we can spread hope and inspire change. See you next time.